strict in terms of the merger. If we went with option one only to spend the $2 million on renovating the rooms, we could still pick the 26-27 school year, for example, or 25-26 school year for a merger, right? That's not the part that's as big a deal as much as we have that $2 million. It could be used to make some minor changes and renovations that were shown in the presentation, but the merger could take place at any time. Not any time, probably no sooner than that, but we could also make it later.
So thank you for that, because we were talking during the break about there is no 25 option here. It goes from 23 to 26. So we're interested to know about that.
The one piece of the dollars that are right now, the $1.9 million that would be reallocated to support option one, you started speaking about what would happen if we lost that window?
Yeah, so if so in looking at the $1.9 million and going through that process, I talked earlier about if we went to a vote and then wanted to see what happened after a vote. If that vote were defeated, could we still utilize the $1.9 million? As we look at long-term planning, we certainly could hang on to that $1.9 million. It will delay building aid getting generated on it long-term. So the longer we wait, we'll have debt service coming on for the 2019 project without aid on about $2 million worth of work. So that's just something to keep in mind. It could be an impact. It can be done, but that's just one of the pieces there, and then delays the time. So should a vote get approved, if we went with an October 23 vote and the vote were approved, and then we begin design work with that $1.9 million, it just delays timing of reconstruction work that would take place for our other buildings when utilizing that spend down money. But just kind of the different impacts as we look at that overall.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments about that? Well, move us on into the budget discussion, if you will.
Non-instruction budget, you know, it's an exciting time of year, really. I mean, to start talking about our Fairport story and how we try to create a budget that reflects our priorities. I always say that the budget is a reflection of our priorities. And if you take a look at our Fairport Central School District, we have over 300 acres of our campus, and that's calculates out to approximately 120 residential lawns. There's 12 building sites, 8 academic building, 1.2 million square feet of building area. There's technology, there's heating and cooling and maintenance costs. If you take a look at what it takes on our weekends, it's so exciting. If you come through all of our schools, even right now, our schools are utilized every single moment, and we're using many of our non-instructional resources, not all of them, but many of our non-instructional resources to impart our wonderful program, and we're looking forward to beginning this process here formally with you tonight on the non-instructional budget. Right now, Mr. Stevens is going to take you down a little walk on some of our highlights of the non-instructional budget that I shared with you this past weekend, and you'll have an opportunity to ask questions using a microphone or going up to the microphone if you choose. So. Okay. Sure, you need us to speak clearly and loudly. Yes.
If you want to pull up
I'm going to pull that up.
So at this point in the process, we're taking a look at the non-instructional or general support portions of the budget, which circles around the administrative offices, our support for technology throughout the district, transportation department, buildings and grounds, insurances, benefits. A lot of those different pieces fall into this portion of the budget. So overall, and we'll go over kind of the memo, and then if you have questions in terms of some of the information or categories, please jump in and ask. We're seeing right now about approximately a $5.9 million increase, or 8.4% to this portion of the budget. I will share that a big piece of this is related to debt service on the 2019 capital project, and that will be coupled with building aid projected for the debt service to help pay that over the 15 years. So we've done short-term borrowings for a couple of years, and getting to the point where the work is getting close to complete and going to long-term debt. Now, one key piece as an asterisk that we'll talk about that, and we keep an eye on, I work with our advisors and construction team, is we have to be at a point where we can submit our final cost reporting by December to generate a full year worth of aid. So we will keep an eye on that, and that may impact our principal payment against the debt itself. So we'll balance that out so we can try to maintain that overall impact to the local share as a whole, as we reviewed when we went through that project proposal. A couple other pieces within the budget related to increases is very typical throughout most of our budget. Both instructional and non-instructional will be the impact on our salaries and benefits. So wage adjustments, we have mid-year wage adjustments or staffing changes, movement between positions across the district, and then our projected increases in the pension systems, our Social Security payments, and health insurance as a whole. So those are kind of the big, large pieces as we look through the non-instructional budget. So here you just see, these are just a couple of the areas where you'll see the percentages a little bit higher in the detail, but important to note as we look through, percentages are proportional to the dollar amount within these categories. So even with a $3,000 increase, for example, on a $20,000 overall category, the percentage will appear high, but it's simply not as large of a dollar increase overall. So it's just reflecting those pieces overall. And that's true of the first really three categories we see on the screen between the Board of Ed, district clerk, and district meeting. So those pieces there are smaller dollar increases overall, but the percentage is just reflected as it relates to the 2022-23 budget lines. So we've seen, for example, an increase in district meetings. So that's where our votes are paid for. There's some additional costs that the county is passing through to school districts, and just the overall cost to pay workers to work the votes. We really appreciate the work they do, and there is a cost to that for the school district. Auditing, that category relates to our claims audit position, as well as our external and internal audit requirements that we have as a school district. So that's simply change in staffing. We've seen some turnover in that position as a whole for the claims auditor, and there's change in staffing in that role. Again, you're going to see a similar trend through many of these categories as it relates to staffing. So personnel and public information services, there is some change in staffing in each department, as well as an increased effort as it relates to our recruitment and advertising for many of the positions that we have in the district that we're recruiting for. We did have an increase in outreach and trying to do billboards and radio ads and really try to promote the positions available in Fairport. So that's a big piece that you see here, that we have a long-term goal to try to continue to recruit. We have been short-staffed in many roles throughout the district in many categories, trying to make a concerted effort to increase our ability to fill those positions. And security of plant, this is new. This is really recognizing the development that we've had as a school district in the area of security. So there is an overall budget category established here to reflect that. We have our coordinator of safety and security in this role, trying to fund equipment. We see camera replacements becoming more prevalent long-term. The state will aid us on $35,000 of camera replacements. You can see here that there's an increased budget beyond the $35,000 to help continue to replace and add cameras throughout our district to help with the security overall. And then trying to identify our evening event needs, as well as looking at the ability to monitor actively from a camera system across the district rather than passively after the fact.
And again, this speaks to what I said earlier. If you take a look at our facilities, you go to Minerva DeLand right now, you go to Fairport High School or to JP, our facilities are used, and they're used well. With that requires to make sure that we could secure them, making sure that people are safe and welcome, and the security cameras are a tool for us to monitor and also protect our investments.
And to add to that, important to note, we did have some of these funds budgeted. So, for example, we've had a coordinator of safety and security that we added to the budget. It's shifting out of the custodial maintenance category to more properly reflect it in a security line. Again, we haven't had this budget center or budget function utilized in the past, and we're trying to really establish these budget lines. So we've shifted monies, again, related to cameras. We had money budgeted for cameras. We had money budgeted for some staffing and some outside services. So there's some reallocation within the budget there as well. Unallocated insurance. One of the increased costs we've seen is cybersecurity. It's becoming more and more common. So coupled with our property values and reevaluation of our the construction that takes place and the value of our property and replacement, we have the cybersecurity. So that's been a piece that is reflected here within the budget. It's including some projected costs for the cyber security insurance. The 1981 code is reflected here. It's actually a decrease in this code. Highlighted out here, it's a fairly large decrease because of the 3-year payment schedule related to the BOCES capital project. So here I highlighted the 3 payments that took place over the 3 years from fiscal year ending 21 through 23. So you ultimately see a decrease of 1.3-ish million within that category. Again, it's coupled with the admin, rent, and capital that the school district has to pay, just like any component school district within BOCES that utilize the services. There may be slight increases in other areas, but overall, it's a large decrease. This will be reflected also on the revenue side of the budget, so there will be a reduction in BOCES aid related to this capital project payment. So just a key piece there to keep in mind.
The board will be visiting BOCES to see the fruits of this investment in the very near future, so I know that was something that you as a board wanted to see, because many of our students do use BOCES, EMCC, and there were some really nice upgrades.
Next category is 5510. That is our district transportation services. Again, mostly related to wage increase projections and bus purchases. We've seen an increase in costs of buses. Here we're looking at the replacement of 9 buses. To stay on our plan for bus replacement, ideally, transportation was hoping to have 10. If you remember last year, we reduced down to 8 as well. With over 100 buses in our fleet, the delaying or reducing the number replaced just delays a long-term replacement overall, and longer we keep the buses. However, trying to balance the increase in cost of buses the schools are seeing related to overall inflation as a whole, reduce that to 9 buses. This will be offset and is an exclusion under the tax cap, but again, trying to balance those pieces as a whole. As it relates long-term, these buses, as we look at the requirements at the state level related to electrifying bus fleets, these still would fall within still having these buses for 10 years as we look long-term. Employee benefits, there's you can see the rates here, average contribution rate for the employee retirement system projected to increase to 13.1%, and the teacher retirement system projected to decrease down to 9.76%. You can see those reflected and they carry through. These expenses in the budget are a factor of salary, so the salaries themselves are then multiplied by the employer contribution rate to identify the budget and costs for the district in 23-24. And health insurance, RASP 2, that is the Rochester Area Schools Health Plan consortium the district is a part of with other fellow Monroe County schools. That realized a overall budget increase of 6.8%. It runs on a calendar year, so it's a January through December plan year. And as of right now, we've been budgeting historically about a 10% increase for the second half of the fiscal year. So in January of 24, trying to project what that portion would be for an increase. We've seen increases over 10%. We've seen increases slightly under 10%. So trying to remain in the 10%. It's tough to know right now where the plan will be budget-wise. That's not typically set until the fall for the following plan year. And then the debt service and interfund transfer. Again, I mentioned this a little bit earlier related to the capital debt. Here you'll see in the budget budgeting for a bond anticipation note interest payment. That's related to a borrowing that we went into back in July of 22. We have that interest payment coming due in July of 23. So that'll be budgeted in next year's budget. And then there's a principal payment budgeted against the debt overall as we look to go to long-term debt. And we will manage and balance that based on when we believe we can have final cost reports filed related to the construction being completed for that work to identify the aid that can be received. So it's either a full year of aid if we file by December 1st, or a half year of aid if we file by June 1st. So we'll identify that and line up the debt accordingly. That's a summary overall of the, kind of the highlights. As you look through the remainder of the non-instructional budget, you'll notice it's aligns with regular increases in salary and contracts and benefits as a whole. Much throughout the budget, trying to keep some supply and equipment lines fairly stable, but may see some slight increase in costs as a whole. We did, as you look through some of the different categories, you'll notice that there may be some slight increases in custodial maintenance supplies simply because cost of paper products continues to rise on us in some of those different areas. We saw that in the food service budget, right, in this year as we push through. It's a separate than general fund, but it is impacting our custodial maintenance area as well.
So all increases are not equal, right? And it depends on the size of the function code that impacts the actual increase. So we spent a lot of time talking about that beforehand.
Did you say? Can you repeat? Did you say not
again?
all increases
We
are
talked about
non-aidable?
adjustments may result in higher percentage increases to the budget function due to lower dollars in certain function categories. There are some increases that are line item increases that you've highlighted, and that's simply because the code isn't as large as other codes. So you're going to see a $5,000 increase pop up as like a 14%.
Correct. Overall. Yes, that's accurate. Yep. Yeah, and throughout the budget, some of the areas that we look at in here that kind of talking about aidability in some of these areas, any of the BOCES account codes where we see increases, there will be BOCES aid received back. Any of the transportation department area, we receive transportation aid back on those expenses in the following year. So I just wanted to kind of mentioned aidability of some of the costs that go up. I want to make sure I clarified that piece on top of what Mr. Provenzano mentioned related to the relative increases and percentages compared to the dollar amounts of a budget center.
Sorry. Just keep it.
Does the TRS falls under our non-instructional budget when you said that the employment retirement system contribution, that goes in our non-instructional instead of instructional?
Yeah, so the budget categories, as we look through non-instructional, the benefits themselves fall under our portion of the non-instructional codes. A little different when we start talking about three-part budget, when we talk program, admin, and capital. That gets broken out differently as it relates to what is considered a program component of what we do. Like, for example, transportation is considered a program component of the budget, but falls into our general support non-instruction as we're preparing budgets and looking at those areas. So it's a good question. When we go through the budget process and we have to present it in different fashions, the program, administrative, and capital, we then spread out, for example, the teacher retirement system costs gets spread out across program and admin because of the different positions that fall under those categories.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, do people have questions about line items? I do, but Matt expects that. No, I can jump in, right? Legal, right? I mean, a couple years ago, because you put and I appreciate that, 2021, 22. Do we really think, I mean, this year is projected at the 150, but just wondering if we're confident we won't spend as much as we did 2 years ago, or we'll be within our normal retainer, just based on everything that's happening, and we know there's people gunning for suits.
Just get to the code.
Sorry, the 1420 line item, if people are looking.
Yeah, so A couple of years ago, yes, we were a little over in legal from the 150,000, of which we can support by liability reserve if we needed to, unless we're able to transfer within the budget as a whole. Projecting to remain within our 150 this year as a whole. Some of the different legal pieces we have taking place also fall under our insurance carrier, so it's not all charged to the general fund legal code because that's paid for and covered under our insurance carrier.
So nice, it's picking up some of those expenses.
Correct.
Okay, great.
Yep.
1680, I think I might recall this. We have quite a bit, the central data processing. Was this one time huge expense we did purposefully that's generating aid, or what's?
Yep. So for the projected expense, that's related to where we'd see some capital building reserve. I'm sorry, capital tech reserve.
Right.
Funds move to between 1680, and then when we look at the instructional side, there might be some 2630 funds as well. So it's a balance of that. We also transfer money. There may be monies budgeted in the technology budget under their equipment line, and anything they can purchase through BOCES, they will do budget transfers to the BOCES code so we can generate aid on those purchases. So that's why we would see a higher expense in those codes, typically than the budget, because we're moving funds into those codes. So
that's
it's
why we
important
expect that one to go down so much, though, is because we had done that as a one-time large purchases that were needed and generating aid to help bring that back in, but on the revenue side. So.
Yeah, those expenses related to allocation for this year have not all been realized yet. So those may not be realized in this fiscal year. They may be a combination over the next 2 fiscal years,
right.
of which then when that aid is generated, we would look to replenish the technology reserve.
Right. Which
as
was
a
the
whole.
plan as we discussed at the time, but we knew it could take multiple years to get that reserve.
Yes, and we also could look at year-end monies as we progress through the year and decide whether or not we'd like to do it at year-end to make it happen, and then future revenues would simply go to fund balance in future years and how we decide to allocate the reserves. But yep, that's the...
Projected expenditures are higher. We're show budgeting lower than that. It's one of those where I don't want to get into a situation where we let our facilities get old, right? That we're maintaining the garage, knowing that there's also the challenge of whether we're going to have to do significant renovation relative to electric right down the road. But just making sure we are in the habit of allocating enough to maintain our facilities, especially new ones. So I know it's nice that it doesn't cost very much yet, but I'd like to make sure we keep it going.
Yep. So the projected expense that we see in the other contractual, we had some repair work taking place for some drainage in the back. So we had monies that carried forward from the previous year that we were able to transfer and identify that. So that was a one-time cost, which is why you don't see a budgetary increase in that category itself, because it was funds that we had accessed from a previous budget year to take care of some drainage work in the back to address some of the...
So it's reflected in the adjusted budget, but you don't anticipate it being repeated.
Correct.
And it's enough, though, to keep our garage in good shape.
Yeah,
It's a new building.
Still a new building, so yes,
Yep.
knock on wood. Thanks, Brian.
Yep.
Yep.
Those were my questions.
Yeah. Any, just to kind of jump into that, those are great questions regarding the transportation center. Any electric work that may be needed there long-term could fall under a capital improvement project piece itself, so that would be why it wouldn't be reflected here in the overall budget, because that would likely require some additional construction work with the lots. And
Yeah, the only my thought was only the hesitancy of how much do you maintain certain things if you realize that area the building might have to have capital infusion in order to transition it over, but we don't know that yet. And
Right.
It was a fairly big topic of conversation on Saturday as well, with legislatures recognizing what they say, right? There's not enough supply for the demand that's been created suddenly by the governor. So we have some interesting things to figure out over the next few years. Anyone else?
I'm communicating with Erica. I'm not texting.
We lost the interest of our superintendent. Okay, well, maybe this is a 45-minute discussion.
She's texting and she's trying to get on.
Yeah, let's just move forward. She's listening on YouTube, and she says YouTube stream is great. She did say that. Yep, she's trying. Okay, that's fine. We're moving along.
May not always be on our side. Go ahead. Agenda, if you don't have anything else. Maybe I should take it back. If there are no other questions, we can move on to executive session. Yes, anybody going once, going twice? Nothing? Okay, take a motion. What's that? Oh, so you're back to the paper and pen.
Join the fun. Join the party.
That's correct. As we go into executive session, we do not plan to make any decisions coming out, so we will reconvene into open session and then immediately adjourn as well. So with that, I'll take a motion to enter into executive session. Brian, thank you. A second? Jan? All in favor? No opposed? 6-0. And I will keep notes for you and send later on the other votes. Thank you, everybody.